The betrayal came disguised as motherly love, just like it had so many times before. I lifted the glass of orange juice to my lips, watching Mom's face radiate that familiar, satisfied warmth as she bustled around the kitchen, preparing what she believed would be my final defeat. This time was different, though. This time, I was ready. The bitter almond undertone hit my tongue immediately. She'd gotten sloppy with the dosage again. 3 months of careful research had taught me to recognize the subtle markers. The way her fingers trembled just slightly when she handed me the glass. The forced brightness in her voice when she said, "Drink up, sweetheart. You'll need all your strength for the medical school entrance exam today." I drained the glass completely, letting a few drops escape the corner of my mouth for authenticity. Her shoulders relaxed as I set the empty vessel on the counter with a soft clink. "There's my good girl," she murmured, already reaching for her phone. Probably to set her timer. She'd want to call the testing center in exactly 47 minutes to report my mysterious illness. The familiar burn started in my stomach, radiating outward like liquid fire. I'd felt this sensation dozens of times throughout my academic career, though I'd only recently learned its true source. Every SAT attempt, every college final, every scholarship interview. Mom had been there with her special drinks, her caring touches, her concerned explanations to teachers about my delicate constitution. But today, the small white pill I'd swallowed 20 minutes earlier was already working its magic. The antidote coursed through my bloodstream, neutralizing her poison before it could take hold. Still, I let myself sway slightly, pressing a palm to my forehead. "Oh no," I whispered, my voice carrying just the right note of approaching panic. "I'm starting to feel—" "What is it, honey?" Mom rushed to my side, her hands fluttering over me with practiced concern. The Oscar-worthy performance she'd perfected over the years. "Dizzy and nauseous." I gripped the counter, knuckles whitening authentically. "Maybe I should stay home today. I don't think I can." "Of course you can't take the exam in this condition." Her voice dripped sympathy, but I caught the flash of triumph in her dark eyes. "I'll call Dr. Martinez right away. This is exactly what happened during your college graduation ceremony, remember?" How could I forget? That day had shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. The memory crashed over me like ice water. 3 months ago, walking across that stage in my cap and gown, the auditorium spinning as my mother's poison finally overwhelmed my system. I'd collapsed right there, in front of 500 people. My diploma scattering across the floor as paramedics rushed to my aid. The hospital tests had revealed everything. Chronic poisoning, trace amounts of various substances in my bloodstream that had been building for years. The doctor's confused expression when he'd asked about my access to certain medications, chemicals, household cleaners. "Your daughter shows signs of systematic exposure to multiple toxins," Dr. Chen had explained to my parents in that sterile room that reeked of antiseptic and broken dreams. "We need to examine her living environment. This isn't accidental." I'd watched my mother's face during that conversation, watched her perform shock, confusion, maternal devastation, watched my father's growing horror as the implications sank in. But in Mom's eyes, just for a split second when she thought no one was looking, I'd seen something else entirely. Relief. She was relieved I'd finally been caught. Not caught poisoning me, caught being sick. Caught having a valid excuse for all my failures, all my missed opportunities, all the times I'd stumbled just short of success. My mysterious illnesses weren't a source of frustration for her. They were her greatest achievement. The investigation that followed had been thorough but ultimately inconclusive. No definitive proof, just suspicious patterns and my word against hers. Child Protective Services couldn't act on speculation, especially when the child was 22 years old and technically capable of leaving home any time. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Not until I had everything I needed to destroy her completely. "I'm calling the testing center," Mom announced now, already dialing. "They'll reschedule your exam once I explain about your condition." I let my breathing become shallow, rapid. Let my complexion pale to that grayish shade she'd grown accustomed to seeing. But inside, my pulse remained steady. The antidote was working perfectly, my own little pharmaceutical miracle, synthesized during long nights in my college chemistry lab when she thought I was too sick to study. "No!" I gasped, grabbing her wrist before she could complete the call. I have to try. This is medical school, Mom. They might not give me another chance. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sweetheart, you're not thinking clearly. Look at yourself. You're practically green. Just give me an hour. Maybe I'll feel better. She wanted to argue. I could see the words forming on her tongue. The careful manipulation she'd used to convince me staying home was my own idea. But something in my expression must have warned her off. 1 hour, she agreed reluctantly. But if you're not better by then. I nodded weakly and stumbled toward the stairs, playing my role to perfection. In my room, I locked the door and opened my laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard, as I accessed the hidden partition where I'd been collecting evidence for months: video files, audio recordings, screenshots of her search history when she thought I was asleep, detailed research into symptoms, dosages, how to mask certain chemical signatures in blood work. The woman had been methodical in her destruction of my future. Now it was my turn to be methodical. An hour later, I emerged from my room looking refreshed. Not perfect, that would be suspicious, but functional. Mom was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, her face a mask of motherly concern. How are you feeling, honey? Better, I said simply. Good enough to take the test. The color drained from her cheeks. Are you sure? You were so sick, I'm going. I picked up my bag and keys, noting how her hands shook as she reached for her phone again. Let me drive you. What if you have another episode? I'll be fine. But what if... I said I'll be fine. My voice carried a steel edge I'd never used with her before. She stepped back, startled by this glimpse of the woman I was becoming. The testing center was a 40-minute drive through downtown traffic. I spent the journey listening to my phone buzz with increasingly frantic voicemails from Mom. Each message more creative than the last, painting elaborate pictures of my fragile health, my history of medical emergencies, my tragic inability to handle stress. By the time I reached the parking garage, she'd called the center directly 6 times. I turned off my phone and walked into the building with steady steps. The proctors looked at me with obvious confusion. Clearly, they'd received some interesting calls about my condition. Excuse me, one of them approached cautiously. Are you Sarah Mitchell? Yes. Your mother called. She said you were experiencing a medical emergency and wouldn't be able to... My mother was mistaken. I smiled pleasantly, pulling out my identification and registration materials. I'm here to take my exam. The 4-hour test passed in a blur of concentrated focus. Multiple choice questions about anatomy, physiology, critical reasoning. Essays about ethical dilemmas in medicine. I'd prepared for this moment my entire life, through years of secret studying when Mom thought I was too sick to learn, through countless nights of research in hidden corners of the library when she believed I was home resting. Every answer came easily. Every essay flowed like water. This was what I'd been born to do, and no amount of poison could change that fundamental truth. When I finally set down my pencil and submitted my test booklet, the proctor smiled at me with genuine warmth. How do you feel about it? She asked, like I just took the first step toward my real life. Walking back to my car, I turned my phone on to find 37 missed calls and 21 voicemails. I didn't need to listen to know what they contained. Panic, excuses, desperate attempts to reach the testing center and undo what I'd accomplished. The drive home was peaceful. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through my windshield, warming my face as I navigated familiar streets with newfound confidence. For the first time in years, I felt completely healthy. No nausea, no dizziness, no mysterious weakness that would conveniently appear whenever I approached success. Mom was waiting in the driveway when I pulled up. Her face was blotchy with tears, her hair disheveled from hours of frantic pacing. She ran to my car before I'd even turned off the engine. Sarah, thank God you're okay. I was so worried when you didn't answer your phone. How did the test go? Did you have to stop early? Did they give you a medical extension? I stepped out of the car slowly, watching her expression shift from relief to confusion, to something approaching fear. I finished the entire exam, I said quietly. All 4 hours. That's impossible. You were so sick this morning. You could barely stand. I felt better, but you never feel better. Not when it matters, not when there's pressure. The words slipped out before she could stop them, revealing more than she'd intended. Funny how that works. I agreed, my tone conversational. Almost like someone doesn't want me to succeed. She laughed, a high, nervous sound that echoed off the garage walls. Don't be ridiculous. I'm your biggest supporter. I've sacrificed everything for your education. Have you? Of course I have. Do you think it's easy watching my daughter struggle with these mysterious health issues? Do you think I enjoy seeing you fail? The word fail hung between us like a blade. She'd said it so casually, so automatically, as if my failure was not just expected, but inevitable. I didn't fail today, I said softly. Her smile flickered. Well, we'll see when the results come back. The important thing is that you tried your best under the circumstances. Under the circumstances. The circumstances she'd created. The circumstances she'd been creating for years, systematically destroying every opportunity that came my way while wearing the mask of a loving, supportive mother. Yes, I agreed, we'll definitely see. That evening, I sat in my room listening to her make phone calls downstairs. Through the thin walls, I could hear her voice carrying on conversations with relatives, family friends, anyone who would listen to her performance as the long-suffering mother of a chronically ill daughter. She insists she finished the whole test, Mom was saying to someone, probably Aunt Linda. But you know how she gets when she's having an episode. Delusional. She probably doesn't even remember half of what happened. I opened my laptop and began typing. Detailed notes about the day's events. Timestamps. Exact quotes. Every piece of evidence carefully documented and backed up to multiple secure servers. 3 days later, an envelope arrived in our mailbox. Thick, expensive paper with the medical school's embossed logo. Mom intercepted it before I came downstairs for breakfast, her face pale as she held the unopened envelope. It's here, she announced, her voice barely above a whisper. What's here? Your test results from the medical school. I poured myself a cup of coffee, regular coffee, not the special blend she usually prepared for me, and settled into my chair at the kitchen table. Well, are you going to open it? Maybe we should wait until after breakfast. Or maybe until your father gets home. This kind of news is mine to receive. I held out my hand. Give me the envelope. She hesitated for just a moment too long. I saw her considering her options, claiming she'd already opened it by mistake, delaying until she could figure out how to spin whatever news it contained, maybe even making the letter disappear entirely. But too many people knew it was coming. Too many witnesses to this moment. Reluctantly, she placed the envelope in my outstretched palm. I tore it open with steady fingers, pulling out the single sheet of paper inside. My eyes scanned the text quickly, professionally, absorbing every word while my mother held her breath beside me. Well, she finally whispered. I looked up at her with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I passed. You what? I passed with the highest score in my testing group, actually. They're recommending me for advanced placement and a partial scholarship. The envelope slipped from her trembling fingers, fluttering to the floor like a dying bird. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, anger, desperation, before settling on something that looked almost like grief. That's wonderful, honey, she managed. I'm so proud of you. But her voice was hollow, empty. The voice of a woman whose carefully constructed world had just crumbled around her. I folded the letter precisely and slipped it back into the envelope. I start orientation in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? The panic was creeping into her tone now. But that's so soon. What about your health? What about getting you settled? What about letting me live my own life? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact instant when she realized everything had changed. When she understood that her sick, dependent daughter was gone forever, replaced by someone who could see through her careful manipulations. Someone who had been planning her own revenge for months. Sarah, she began carefully, I think we need to talk. Do we? I stood up, smoothing my hair with one hand. Because I think we've said everything we need to say. Some of us have just been saying it with actions instead of words. I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the knob. Oh, and Mom, next time you want to poison someone, you might want to research antidotes as thoroughly as you research toxins. Just a suggestion from your future doctor daughter. The silence that followed me up the stairs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. 2 weeks stretched between my test results and orientation day like a delicate spider web, trembling with unspoken tensions. Mom had been unnaturally quiet since our kitchen confrontation, her usual controlling chatter replaced by watchful silences and calculating stares. She moved through our house like a predator reassessing her territory, and I knew another attack was coming. It arrived on a Wednesday evening, wrapped in the familiar disguise of maternal celebration. "We need to commemorate this achievement properly," she announced over dinner, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. "My daughter, accepted to medical school. This calls for your favorite meal." Dad looked up from his plate of meatloaf, confusion creasing his weathered features. "Didn't we already celebrate when the letter came?" "That was just initial excitement," Mom waved dismissively. "This is different. This is special." The way she emphasized the word sent ice through my veins. Special meant poisoned. Special meant another attempt to derail my future before it could truly begin. "That's really not necessary," I said carefully, cutting my meat into precise squares. "I'm happy with regular dinners." "Nonsense." Her smile stretched too wide, reminding me of a shark scenting blood. "Tomorrow night, I'm making your absolute favorite, lasagna with that ricotta mixture you love, garlic bread with the herb butter, and my special chocolate mousse for dessert." My absolute favorite. The meal she'd prepared before every major academic milestone, the one that had preceded my worst poisoning episodes. The ricotta mixture that could hide any number of tasteless toxins, the herb butter that would mask bitter undertones, the chocolate mousse rich enough to disguise anything. "Sounds wonderful," I lied, already formulating my counter strategy. That night, I lay in bed, listening to her move around the kitchen below. The soft sounds of preparation drifted through the heating vents, cabinets opening and closing, the whisper of measuring spoons against glass bottles, the careful clink of containers being hidden away. She was being methodical again, preparing her arsenal for tomorrow's assault. I spent the hours until dawn researching. My laptop screen cast blue shadows across my face as I delved deeper into her digital footprints, following trails I'd only begun to explore. Social media accounts she thought were private, professional licensing databases, academic records from her brief stint in nursing school 30 years ago. What I found there made my blood freeze. Rebecca Ann Whitmore, my mother's maiden name, had been expelled from St. Catherine's nursing program in 1994 for academic dishonesty and concerning behavior toward fellow students. The official records were sealed, but I'd learned to navigate the darker corners of the internet during my months of investigation. Student newspaper archives from that year told a different story. 3 separate incidents of fellow nursing students becoming mysteriously ill during critical exams. Always the same pattern: sudden onset nausea, disorientation, and collapse. Always students who had been outperforming Rebecca in clinical rotations. Always students who had accepted food or drinks from their helpful classmate. The final incident had involved a girl named Patricia Chen. She'd ended up hospitalized for a week with what doctors had initially suspected was food poisoning. But Patricia had been smart enough to save samples of the coffee Rebecca had given her, and lab analysis had revealed traces of ipecac syrup and other substances. Rebecca Whitmore had been quietly expelled to avoid scandal. No criminal charges were filed. The school wanted to protect its reputation, and Patricia's parents were more concerned with their daughter's recovery than seeking justice. My mother hadn't just been poisoning me. This was her pattern, her method, her way of eliminating competition and controlling outcomes for over 3 decades. I was simply her latest, longest-running victim. The next evening arrived with the scent of oregano and basil drifting through our house. Mom had been cooking since noon, humming old songs while she layered pasta and meat sauce with the precision of a chemist mixing compounds. "Smells incredible in here," Dad commented as he walked through the kitchen, stealing a piece of garlic bread from the cooling rack. "Don't spoil your appetite," Mom scolded playfully, but I noticed how she watched him chew, how her shoulders relaxed when he showed no adverse reactions. Whatever she'd added to tonight's meal was targeted specifically. The dining room had been transformed into a celebration space. Our good china gleamed under candlelight, cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles beside each plate. A small bouquet of white roses served as a centerpiece, white for new beginnings or perhaps for surrender. This is really too much, I protested as we gathered around the table. Nothing is too much for my brilliant daughter. Mom's eyes glittered with anticipation as she served generous portions of lasagna onto each plate. The ricotta mixture glistened under the warm light, creamy white with flecks of herbs that could hide any number of sins. I watched her hands as she prepared my plate. Steady, confident, practiced. She'd done this so many times that the ritual had become automatic. The slight pause as she reached for the serving spoon from a particular spot. The way she scraped the bottom of the lasagna pan, where the heaviest substances would have settled, exclusively for my portion. To Sarah's future! Dad raised his wine glass in a toast, completely oblivious to the drama playing out before him. To Sarah's future, Mom echoed, but her toast carried a different meaning entirely. I lifted my own glass with a steady hand, to getting exactly what we deserve. The first bite of lasagna was exquisite. Mom had always been an excellent cook, and tonight she'd outdone herself. Rich meat sauce, perfectly seasoned ricotta, pasta cooked to ideal tenderness. If not for the bitter metallic undertone that coated my tongue, I might have genuinely enjoyed it. But I was ready for her this time. While Mom bustled back to the kitchen for more garlic bread, I executed the switch I'd practiced dozens of times in my room. My plate slid smoothly to Dad's position while his moved to mine. The motion was fluid, natural, disguised as reaching for the water pitcher. "Everything okay, honey?" Dad asked, noticing my sudden attention to hydration. "Just thirsty. This is delicious, by the way." I took another bite from his original plate, clean, safe, exactly what food should taste like. Mom returned with the bread basket, her eyes immediately going to my plate. I saw her calculate the amount I'd supposedly eaten, her satisfaction evident as she noted the depleted portion. "How are you feeling?" she asked with motherly concern, settling back into her chair. "Great, really great." I smiled brightly, cutting another piece of the untainted lasagna. I can't remember the last time I felt this good during a big meal. A flicker of confusion crossed her features. By now, I should have been showing the first signs. A slight pallor, complaints of warmth, maybe excusing myself to the bathroom. Instead, I was practically glowing with health and appetite. "That's wonderful," she said slowly. "Sometimes stress can affect digestion, you know. Maybe the relief of getting accepted has helped your system." "Maybe." I took a long sip of water, watching her over the rim of my glass. Or maybe I'm just finally becoming immune to whatever's been making me sick all these years. The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Dad continued eating obliviously, but Mom's fork had frozen halfway to her mouth. Her eyes searched my face for any hint that I was still the naive, trusting daughter she'd been manipulating for decades. I wasn't. "I think I'll save room for dessert," I announced, pushing back from the table. "That chocolate mousse looks incredible." "Oh, you don't need to," Mom started. "But I want to. It's my celebration, right?" She had no choice but to serve the mousse, her hands trembling slightly as she spooned the rich chocolate mixture into delicate glass bowls. I could practically see her mind racing, trying to calculate dosages and timing. How much had I actually consumed? When should the effects begin? Why was I still sitting here looking perfectly healthy? The mousse was divine, silky, decadent, with that familiar bitter aftertaste that I'd learned to associate with her special ingredients. I ate every spoonful while maintaining cheerful conversation about my upcoming orientation schedule. "I should probably get to bed soon," I said eventually, glancing at the antique clock on the mantel. "Big day tomorrow." "Yes, you should rest." Mom's relief was palpable, especially if you're feeling tired. "Actually, I feel energized. Like I could stay up all night." I began clearing plates, stacking them with deliberate precision. But I suppose I should be responsible. I kissed both my parents goodnight and headed upstairs, knowing Mom would be watching my every step for signs of distress. In my room, I waited exactly 30 minutes before beginning my performance. The first groan was soft, barely audible through the closed door. Then, a few minutes later, a slightly louder sound of discomfort. I knew she'd be listening, timing my decline with the precision of a scientist monitoring an experiment. By 10 o'clock, I was making regular trips to the bathroom, letting my footsteps drag heavily across the hardwood floors. Each journey took a little longer, my movements becoming more labored and unsteady. Sarah! Mom's voice called through my bedroom door, perfectly calibrated with maternal concern. Are you all right, sweetheart? Just feeling a little queasy, I replied weakly, probably just nerves about tomorrow. Do you want me to call Dr. Martinez? This sounds like your condition flaring up again. Maybe in the morning, I'm sure it'll pass. But we both knew it wouldn't pass. We both knew exactly how this script was supposed to unfold. I spent the next hour creating increasingly convincing sounds of distress, while actually setting up the most sophisticated surveillance system I could manage with my limited resources. Tiny cameras positioned strategically throughout the house, audio recorders hidden in common areas, keystroke loggers installed on the family computer during brief moments when I pretended to stumble downstairs for water. By midnight, I was officially too sick to attend orientation the next morning. I'm so worried about you, Mom whispered as she sat beside my bed, pressing a cool washcloth to my supposedly fevered forehead. This is exactly what happened before your college graduation. What if this is some kind of chronic condition? What if medical school is too much stress for your system? Maybe you're right, I murmured, letting my voice crack with disappointment. Maybe I'm not strong enough for this. Oh, sweetheart. Her sympathy sounded so genuine that for a moment, I almost believed it myself. There's no shame in recognizing your limitations. Plenty of smart people aren't cut out for the demands of medical training, but I wanted it so much. I know you did, and I'm proud of you for trying. She smoothed my hair with gentle fingers, the same hands that had been systematically poisoning me for years. We'll call the school in the morning and explain about your health issues. I'm sure they'll understand. After she left, I lay in the darkness, listening to her move around downstairs. Through my hidden microphones, I could hear her making phone calls, first to Dr. Martinez's answering service, then to the medical school's administration office, leaving detailed messages about my recurring health problems and my family's concerns about my ability to handle academic stress. She was already building the narrative for my withdrawal, but I had other plans. At 3 a.m., while she slept soundly in her bed, I slipped out of the house through my bedroom window. The route I'd practiced dozens of times during my months of investigation. Down the oak tree, across the neighbor's yard to where I'd hidden my car 3 blocks away. The all-night pharmacy was a beacon of fluorescent light in the sleeping city. I purchased supplies with cash I'd been saving, makeup to create realistic pallor, eye drops to simulate illness, everything I'd need for the most important performance of my life. Back home before dawn, I spent an hour perfecting my appearance in the bathroom mirror. Sunken cheeks, dark circles under my eyes, the grayish complexion I'd worn so many times before. But underneath the carefully applied illusion, I was healthier than I'd ever been, stronger than she'd ever allowed me to become. Mom found me collapsed on the bathroom floor at 7 a.m., exactly as I'd planned. Her scream of alarm echoed through the house, bringing Dad running from the kitchen where he'd been making coffee. "Call 911!" she shrieked, cradling my apparently unconscious form. "She's having another episode." "No," I whispered, letting my eyes flutter open with heroic effort. "No hospitals, just give me a few minutes." "Honey, you need medical attention. This is serious." "Please." I gripped her hand weakly, feeling the irony burn in my throat. "I just need to rest. If I'm not better by this afternoon." She nodded reluctantly, helping me back to bed with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this many times before. As she tucked the blankets around my supposedly fragile form, I caught a glimpse of something in her eyes that chilled me more than any poison ever had. Satisfaction. Deep, profound satisfaction. This was what she lived for. These moments when I was completely dependent on her care, when my failures became her opportunities to play the devoted mother, when my weakness made her feel powerful. "I'll call the school," she murmured, already reaching for her phone. They need to know you won't be attending orientation today. Maybe, maybe I should withdraw entirely. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I forced them out. If I can't even handle the first day, let's not make any hasty decisions. Darcy's, she replied, but her tone suggested she'd already made this decision for me. We'll see how you're feeling in a few days. After she left my room, I activated every recording device I'd planted. Every camera, every microphone, every piece of evidence-gathering equipment I'd spent months installing throughout our house. Then, I settled in to watch her destroy my future one more time. Through hidden cameras, I watched her make phone call after phone call. First to the medical school, explaining in hushed, worried tones about my recurring health condition and our family's concerns about my ability to handle the stress of medical training. She's been struggling with this for years, Mom explained to whoever was on the other end of the line. We've seen specialists, tried different treatments, but nothing seems to help. The episodes always seem to coincide with high-stress situations. Then calls to relatives, spreading the word about my latest setback with theatrical grief. To family friends, building a network of witnesses to my ongoing health struggles. To Dr. Martinez's office, requesting emergency consultations and prescription renewals for medications I'd never actually taken. Each conversation was a masterpiece of manipulation, painting her as the long-suffering mother of a chronically ill daughter while subtly undermining any hope I might have of pursuing my dreams. But the most revealing recordings came when she thought she was alone. Perfect timing, I heard her mutter to herself while pacing the kitchen. Right before she could actually start. Now there's a clear pattern of illness associated with academic pressure. Later, while cleaning up from our celebration dinner, she ate every bite, finally learning to trust her mother's cooking. And most damning of all, a phone call to someone I didn't recognize. The medical school thing is handled. Another convenient episode right before orientation. At this rate, she'll never leave home. The person on the other end said something I couldn't make out, but Mom's response was crystal clear. 24 years of careful management, and she still doesn't suspect a thing. Sometimes the best prison is one the prisoner builds for herself. 24 years. She'd been doing this since I was born. Every childhood illness that had kept me home from important school events. Every mysterious stomach bug that had coincided with sleepovers or birthday parties. Every bout of weakness that had prevented me from trying out for sports teams or joining academic competitions. None of it had been real. All of it had been her. By afternoon, I had enough evidence to destroy her completely. Video proof of her disposing of medicine bottles in the outside trash bins. Audio recordings of her admitting to sabotaging my academic career. Phone records showing her pattern of calling schools and institutions to report my episodes at strategically timed moments. But I wasn't ready to use it yet. Not until I'd given her enough rope to hang herself completely. At 5 p.m., I made my miraculous recovery. Mom, I called weakly from my bedroom. I think I might be feeling a little better. She rushed upstairs immediately, her face a mask of concerned motherhood. But I caught the flicker of annoyance in her eyes when she saw me sitting up in bed, color returning to my cheeks. That's wonderful, sweetheart, but you should still rest. These episodes can be unpredictable. But orientation is tomorrow morning. Maybe if I'm feeling better. Absolutely not. Her voice sharpened before she caught herself, softening back into maternal concern. I already called the school and explained about your condition. They were very understanding. You called them? Without asking me? You were unconscious, honey. I had to make a decision. But what did you tell them exactly? Something flickered behind her eyes. Calculation, strategy, the careful weighing of lies. Just the truth. That you have a chronic health condition that makes academic stress challenging. The truth. I repeated the words like I was tasting them. Interesting way to put it. Sarah, I know you're disappointed, but we have to face reality. Your health comes first. My health. Another taste test. Right. She studied my face carefully, searching for signs of the compliant, defeated daughter she'd spent decades creating. Instead, she found something new. Something that had been growing stronger with each day of freedom from her poisons, each moment of clarity her chemicals hadn't been able to steal. I think, I said slowly, meeting her gaze directly, it's time we had an honest conversation about my health. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom's smile became rigid, artificial, like a mask that no longer fit properly. What do you mean? I mean, it's interesting how my episodes always happen at such convenient times. Right before tests, interviews, important events. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, sitting up straighter than I had in years, almost like someone's been timing them. That's ridiculous, Sarah. Stress-related illnesses often coincide with someone putting Ipecac syrup in my food. The words hit her like a physical blow. She actually staggered backward, her hand reaching for the doorframe for support. The careful mask of maternal concern finally slipped, revealing something cold and desperate underneath. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? I stood up fully, my movements steady and strong. No weakness, no trembling, no signs of the chronic invalid she'd spent decades creating. Because I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, just like Patricia Chen knew back in 1994. The name hit its target perfectly. All the color drained from Mom's face, leaving her looking older than I'd ever seen her, vulnerable, caught. How did you, she whispered, find out about your nursing school expulsion? About your pattern of poisoning fellow students who outperformed you academically? About the 24 years you've spent systematically destroying your own daughter's future? Each question landed like a hammer blow. She sank into the chair beside my desk, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Sarah, you don't understand. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Silence stretched between us, thick with decades of lies and manipulation. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes that held no trace of the loving mother she'd pretended to be. You have no idea how hard it is, she said quietly, watching everyone else succeed when you've lost everything. Watching your own daughter surpass you in every way. So you decided to stop me. I decided to protect you. But even she didn't seem to believe the words anymore. From disappointment, from failure, from the kind of rejection I faced. By rejecting me first, she had no answer for that. No justification that could possibly make sense. We stared at each other across the ruins of our relationship, mother and daughter, predator and prey, locked in a truth that could never be taken back. Orientation is tomorrow morning, I said finally. I'll be attending. Sarah, please, let's talk about this rationally. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. I moved toward my closet, pulling out the outfit I'd already selected for tomorrow. Professional, confident, the uniform of someone ready to begin their real life. 24 years of fog is finally lifting. If you go tomorrow, if you pursue this path, her voice carried a threat she didn't quite dare to voice completely. What? You'll poison me again? You'll sabotage my education? You'll call my professors and tell them I'm mentally unstable? I turned to face her fully. Go ahead, try. But this time, I'll be ready for you. The promise in my voice was unmistakable. The war between us had finally been declared openly, and we both knew there would be no going back. She left my room without another word, but I could hear her moving around the house with frantic energy. Drawers opening and closing, cabinets being rearranged, the sound of bottles clinking in the kitchen trash. She was destroying evidence, or trying to, but it was far too late for that. I had everything I needed to end her reign of toxic motherhood forever. Tomorrow, I would walk into that medical school orientation as the person I was always meant to be, strong, healthy, brilliant, and finally free. And if she tried to stop me one more time, the world would learn exactly what Rebecca Ann Whitmore had been doing to her daughter for the past 2.5 decades. The spider web of lies she'd woven around my life was about to collapse completely. And this time, I would be the one watching her fall. Medical school orientation day dawned crisp and golden, autumn air carrying the promise of transformation. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my navy blazer, marveling at the healthy glow in my cheeks. 3 months without systematic poisoning had restored me to a version of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. The woman staring back at me looked capable, determined, unbreakable. Downstairs, Mom sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually perfect hair hung limp around her shoulders. She'd aged a decade overnight, the weight of our confrontation etching new lines into her face. "You don't have to do this," she said without looking up, as I poured myself orange juice from a fresh container I'd purchased myself and hidden in the garage refrigerator. "Yes, I do." "Sarah, please, let's talk about this rationally. Maybe we can find a compromise." I turned to face her fully, noting how she flinched under my direct gaze. "What kind of compromise? You poison me a little less? You only sabotage half my opportunities?" "That's not what I'm leaving in 10 minutes," I interrupted. "I'll be home late. I'm having dinner with some classmates to celebrate the start of our program." Her head snapped up at that. "Classmates? But you don't know anyone yet." "I will by tonight." The drive to campus took 25 minutes through bustling city streets. I'd made this journey during my interview process, but today everything looked different. Sharper, more vivid. Like someone had adjusted the contrast on my entire world. The medical school building rose before me in red brick and limestone, its windows catching the morning sun like beacons. Students streamed through the main entrance, my peers, my future colleagues, people who would never know how close I'd come to missing this moment entirely. Inside, the orientation auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. 200 of us, carefully selected from thousands of applicants, ready to begin the most challenging academic program of our lives. I found a seat in the middle section, close enough to hear every word, but far enough back to observe the room. "Welcome," Dean Martinez began, her voice carrying easily through the hall, "to the next chapter of your journey toward healing others." Healing others. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I sat here preparing to learn how to cure diseases and mend broken bodies, my own mother had spent decades systematically poisoning me. The morning passed in a blur of presentations about curriculum, expectations, and the rigorous standards we'd be held to. During lunch break, I exchanged numbers with several classmates. Lisa, a former engineer changing careers. Marcus, whose parents had immigrated from Guatemala so he could become the family's first doctor. Jennifer, a former military medic who'd seen too much war and wanted to heal instead of patch up casualties, real connections. Authentic relationships built on shared goals and mutual respect rather than toxic dependency and control. I was walking across campus toward my first afternoon class when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "How are you feeling? Any episodes?" I deleted it without responding. The weeks that followed established a rhythm I'd never experienced before. Early mornings reviewing anatomy diagrams, long days in lectures and labs, evenings spent in study groups where my contributions were valued rather than dismissed. For the first time in my life, I was thriving in an academic environment. My grades reflected this newfound freedom. While my classmates struggled with the adjustment to medical school's intensity, I absorbed information like a plant finally exposed to sunlight. Biochemistry, physiology, pathology. Subjects that should have been overwhelming instead felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place. "You're a natural at this," Professor Chen commented after I'd correctly identified a complex tissue sample that had stumped most of the class. "Have you considered specializing in diagnostic pathology?" The praise felt foreign on my ears. I'd grown so accustomed to academic failure that success seemed almost suspicious. But my lab partners confirmed what the professors were seeing. I had an intuitive grasp of medical concepts that couldn't be faked or manufactured. I was exactly where I belonged, which made my mother's escalating sabotage all the more vicious. It started subtly. My biochemistry textbook disappeared from my room the night before a major exam. I found it 3 days later, water damaged and hidden in the basement behind the furnace. "How strange," Mom said when I mentioned it. "Maybe you misplaced it during one of your studying sessions. You've been so stressed lately." Then my laptop charger vanished right before a crucial online assignment was due. Hours of frantic searching turned up nothing until I discovered it buried in the kitchen garbage, deliberately broken. "Accidents happen," she shrugged when confronted. "Good thing you have that old backup charger." The backup charger I'd never owned. The backup charger she'd apparently purchased and hidden away, waiting for this exact scenario. Our internet service began experiencing mysterious outages that coincided perfectly with important deadlines. The cable company's technician found nothing wrong with the connection, suggesting the problem might be intermittent interference from electronic devices in the home. When I challenged Mom about the timing, she looked genuinely bewildered. Honey, I don't understand technology well enough to manipulate it. Maybe it's just bad luck? But luck didn't explain the methodical nature of each disruption. Luck didn't account for how every technical failure happened at precisely the moment it would cause maximum academic damage. The most insidious sabotage was the sleep disruption. Every night around 2 a.m., something would wake me. A mysterious crash from downstairs, the smoke detector beeping once before falling silent, or the unmistakable sound of someone moving through the house. By the time I investigated, I'd find nothing unusual, just the lingering scent of her perfume in the hallway. I didn't hear anything, she'd say when I asked the next morning. You must have been dreaming. Medical school stress can cause all sorts of sleep disturbances. After 2 weeks of this psychological warfare, I was running on 4 hours of sleep per night. My concentration began to slip during lectures. My hands shook during laboratory work. Several classmates asked if I was feeling all right. Just adjusting to the workload, I assured them. But privately, I recognized the familiar symptoms. She was breaking me down systematically, the same way she'd done for years. The only difference was that instead of using poison, she was using exhaustion and sabotage. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning when Professor Williams announced that our anatomy midterm had been rescheduled for the following day. I know this is short notice, he apologized, but we need to accommodate a guest lecture next week. Use tonight to review the muscle and skeletal systems thoroughly. I rushed home to collect my anatomy atlases and study guides, only to find my entire medical school book collection missing from my room. Every textbook, every study guide, every carefully annotated notebook, gone. Mom? I called out, searching the house frantically. In here, dear. Her voice drifted from the living room. I found her sitting calmly on the sofa, reading a romance novel with a cup of tea steaming beside her. Where are my medical textbooks? Your what? My textbooks, the ones that were on my desk this morning. She looked genuinely puzzled, tilting her head like a confused bird. I haven't seen any textbooks. Are you sure you didn't take them to school? I'm positive they were in my room. Well, they must be somewhere. Have you checked your car? Sometimes when we're stressed, we do things and forget. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost believed her. Almost accepted that I'd somehow misplaced hundreds of dollars worth of essential textbooks right before a crucial exam. But then I caught sight of her bookmark, a medical school library card that had been tucked inside my histology atlas. The same card that should have been 40 miles away on campus, not here in our living room. She'd made a mistake. Finally, after decades of careful manipulation, she'd left evidence. I need to go buy replacement books, I said evenly. The campus bookstore closes in 2 hours. Of course, honey, I'm sure they'll turn up eventually. Things always do. I drove toward campus with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. But instead of heading to the bookstore, I made a detour to the 24-hour storage facility 3 miles from our house. The night manager, a bored-looking college student, barely glanced up when I approached his desk. I need to rent a small unit, I explained. Something secure where I can store important documents. How small? Just big enough for books, papers, maybe some electronic equipment. Within an hour, I had my own private fortress. 10 feet by 10 feet of climate-controlled security where my mother's reach couldn't extend. I transferred my most essential belongings there immediately. Backup copies of assignments, spare electronics, emergency supplies. But more importantly, I began moving my evidence collection to the storage unit. Months of recorded conversations, hidden camera footage, documented patterns of sabotage. Everything I'd need to destroy her completely when the time came. That night, I pretended to study using library books while actually transcribing the most damaging audio recordings onto secure digital files. Her voice, clear and unmistakable, admitting to years of systematic abuse. 24 years of careful management, and she still doesn't suspect a thing. The medical school thing is handled. Another convenient episode right before orientation. Sometimes the best prison is one the prisoner builds for herself. Each quote was a nail in the coffin of her credibility. Each recording was another piece of the case I was building against her. But I needed more. I needed something so undeniable, so comprehensive, that no one could dismiss it as the fabrications of an unstable daughter. The opportunity came the following week. "Sarah," Mom announced over breakfast, "I think you should take a break from medical school." I looked up from my cereal, noting the careful way she'd positioned herself between me and the kitchen exits. "Excuse me?" "Just temporarily, a semester or two to focus on your health. You've been looking so tired lately, so stressed. I'm worried about you." "I'm fine." "Are you?" "Because Professor Williams called yesterday. He said you seemed disoriented during lab, that you were having trouble with basic procedures." My blood turned to ice. Professor Williams had never called our house. I'd been performing excellently in his class, earning praise for my technique and attention to detail. "He called here? He's concerned about your well-being. We had a long conversation about your academic struggles and your history of health issues." "What exactly did you tell him?" "The truth. That you've been dealing with chronic illness for years, that academic stress tends to trigger episodes. That perhaps medical school isn't the right fit for someone with your limitations." The word limitations hit me like a physical blow. She'd contacted my professor directly, poisoning his perception of me with her carefully crafted narrative of failure and fragility. "You had no right to do that." "I had every right. I'm your mother, and I'm watching you destroy yourself pursuing something you're clearly not capable of handling." "Not capable of handling?" I repeated her words slowly, tasting their cruelty. Interesting assessment from someone who's been systematically sabotaging my education for decades. Her face went blank, that practiced expression of confused innocence she'd perfected over the years. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" I pulled out my phone and played one of the recordings I'd captured the previous week. Her voice filled the kitchen, crystal clear and undeniably hers. She ate every bite, finally learning to trust her mother's cooking. The color drained from her face as her own words condemned her. She stared at the phone like it was a venomous snake, her carefully constructed lies crumbling in real time. "Where did you get that?" "I have hours of recordings, Mom. Months of evidence. Video footage of you disposing of poison bottles. Audio of you calling my professors to report fake medical emergencies. Documentation of every textbook you've hidden, every internet outage you've caused, every night you've deliberately disrupted my sleep." She sank into her chair, suddenly looking every one of her 58 years. "Sarah, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You've been destroying my life methodically and deliberately since I was born. The only thing I don't understand is why." Tears began streaming down her cheeks, but they looked rehearsed rather than genuine. Another performance. Another manipulation. "Because I love you," she whispered. "Because I wanted to protect you from the pain I experienced." "By causing me pain?" "By keeping you safe. By making sure you never had to face the kind of rejection and failure that destroyed me." "So you rejected and sabotaged me instead." "I kept you with me. I kept you safe from a world that would have chewed you up and spit you out." The twisted logic of it took my breath away. In her mind, systematic abuse was an act of love. Destroying my opportunities was protection. Keeping me weak and dependent was keeping me safe. "Where's Dad?" I asked suddenly, realizing he should have been home from work by now. Something flickered in her eyes. He had to work late, a big project." "Call him." "What?" "Call Dad, right now. Tell him to come home." "Sarah, he's busy." "Call him, or I will." With trembling fingers, she dialed his number. I could hear his voice through the speaker, distant but clear. "Rebecca, is everything okay? Could you come home? We need to talk, all of us." "I'm still at the office, but I can be there in 20 minutes. Is Sarah all right?" We're having a discussion about her future." "Her future?" Dad's voice carried a note I'd never heard before, something between relief and resignation. I'll be right there. The line went dead, leaving us in uncomfortable silence. He knows, I said quietly. Doesn't he? Mom's tears were falling faster now, but she said nothing. He's known for years and he's done nothing to stop you. Your father, she began, then stopped herself. What about my father? He's weak. He's always been weak. When I met him, he was failing out of engineering school. I helped him get through it, helped him find a job, built his entire career. Without me, he would have been nothing. And me? You were going to be different. You were going to be strong, successful, everything I never got the chance to be. Her voice cracked with something that might have been genuine emotion. But then you started surpassing me. Even as a child, you were smarter, more capable, more determined than I'd ever been. And I realized, what? I realized you were going to leave me behind, just like everyone else always had. The confession hung between us like a blade. All these years, all this sabotage, all this systematic destruction of my potential, it had all been motivated by her terror of abandonment. She'd rather destroy me than lose me. The front door opened and Dad walked in, his tie loosened and his usually neat hair disheveled. He took one look at our tear-stained faces and sank heavily into the nearest chair. So, he said quietly, it's finally happening. You knew, I accused him. All these years, you knew what she was doing to me and you said nothing. His face crumpled with shame. I suspected, but I told myself it couldn't be true. I told myself she was just overprotective. Overprotective? My voice rose with incredulous anger. She was poisoning me, Dad, systematically, deliberately for 24 years, and you suspected and did nothing? I tried to convince myself there were other explanations, that you really were just fragile, that the timing was coincidental. Bullshit. The profanity felt good on my tongue, sharp and cleansing. You knew, and you chose her over me. She controls everything, he said desperately. The finances, the house, my job connections. When I got promoted to department head 5 years ago, it was because she'd been cultivating relationships with the right people. My entire career exists because of her networking and manipulation. So you sold your daughter's future to protect your position? He had no answer for that, no justification that could possibly make sense. Both of you, I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word, have betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. You, I pointed at Mom, actively destroyed my opportunities for decades. And you, I turned to Dad, passively allowed it to happen because confronting her would have been inconvenient. Sarah, please, Mom began. No, I'm done with please. I'm done with explanations and excuses and justifications. I stood up, towering over both of them in their chairs. Here's what's going to happen. I'm finishing medical school. I'm pursuing the career I've always wanted. And neither of you will ever interfere with my life again. How can you say that? Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm your mother. A mother protects her child. A mother nurtures her child's dreams. A mother celebrates her child's successes. I looked down at her with something approaching pity. You are not my mother. You're my abuser, and I'm done being your victim. And I walked toward the stairs, then paused at the bottom step. Oh, and Mom, I've been accepted to Harvard Medical School. Full scholarship. I'll be transferring there next semester. The silence that followed was deafening. That's impossible, she breathed. You never applied to Harvard. I smiled. The first genuine smile I'd worn in their presence for months. Didn't I? Are you sure about that? Because I distinctly remember mailing my application back in September. But I would have seen the mail. Would you? All of it? Every single piece? The realization dawned in her eyes like sunrise over a wasteland. She understood, finally, that I'd been playing a deeper game than she'd imagined. That while she'd been sabotaging my obvious moves, I'd been making hidden preparations she never suspected. Good night, I said pleasantly. I have studying to do. Harvard has very high standards, and I wouldn't want to disappoint them. I left them sitting there in their ruins, two broken people who had tried to break me and failed. Upstairs in my room, I opened my laptop and began crafting carefully worded emails to several law firms that specialized in elder abuse and family law. Not because I wanted revenge, though I certainly deserved it, but because other victims needed protection. If mom had been doing this to me for 24 years, if she'd done it to nursing school classmates 3 decades ago, how many others had suffered under her systematic destruction? How many futures had she poisoned along with their bodies? My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my study group partner. Pizza and pathology tonight at 7? Jennifer found some great case studies to review. I typed back quickly. Absolutely, I'll bring the good coffee. Real friendships, authentic connections, a future built on my own merits rather than someone else's manipulations. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. And no one, not my poisoning mother, not my complicit father, not anyone, would ever take that away from me again. The spider web of toxic control they'd woven around me was finally dissolving, strand by strand. And I was the one cutting myself free. 3 weeks passed in tense silence. Mom moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes hollow and calculating. She'd stopped trying to engage me in conversation, stopped offering food or drinks, stopped pretending to be the caring mother she'd never actually been. But I knew she wasn't done. Cornered predators were the most dangerous kind. The attack came on the morning of my biochemistry final, the most important exam of the semester, worth 40% of our grade. I'd been preparing for weeks, my notes organized in perfect color-coded sections, my understanding of cellular processes finally clicking into place. I woke to find my bedroom door standing wide open. Every study guide was gone. My laptop had vanished. Even my backup flash drives had disappeared from their hiding spots. 23 years of experience had taught her exactly where I kept my important materials. Looking for something? Mom's voice drifted from the kitchen. I found her sitting at the table, sipping coffee with the satisfied expression of a cat who'd caught a particularly clever mouse. My laptop sat open beside her elbow, the screen showing my deleted files folder. Where are my study materials? What study materials? The ones you stole from my room while I was sleeping. She tilted her head innocently. I don't know what you're talking about, dear. Maybe you misplaced them during one of your late-night study sessions. The gaslighting was so familiar it felt like slipping into worn shoes. But this time, instead of confusion or panic, I felt only cold satisfaction. She'd finally made the move I'd been waiting for. You're right, I said calmly. I probably did misplace them. Good thing I have everything memorized anyway. Her smile flickered slightly. She'd expected tears, rage, the desperate scrambling of a victim facing academic disaster. Instead, I poured myself coffee and sat down across from her, like we were discussing the weather. How confident are you feeling about the exam? She asked, probing for weakness. Very confident. Professor Martinez said the format would be straightforward, multiple choice, and short essays. Nothing I can't handle. The lie rolled off my tongue smoothly. Professor Martinez had actually warned us the exam would be the most challenging of the year, requiring detailed knowledge of complex biochemical pathways. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of how you're handling the stress. Thanks to you, I've had plenty of practice. Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, just that all those years of mysterious illnesses really taught me resilience. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, two players in a game where only one could survive. She thought she held all the cards. She had no idea I'd been playing chess while she played checkers. I should get going, I said, standing up. Don't want to be late. Sarah, wait. I paused at the doorway, noting how her voice had taken on that familiar tone of false concern. Maybe you should stay home today. You look pale. What if you have another episode during the exam? I feel fine. But what if you don't? What if the stress triggers something? You could collapse right there in the lecture hall. Her words carried the weight of prophecy. Not prediction, but promise. If that happens, I'll deal with it. I walked to my car with steady steps, ignoring her calls to be careful and call if you need anything. In my rearview mirror, I watched her standing in the doorway, phone already pressed to her ear. The drive to campus took 15 minutes through morning traffic. My phone buzzed constantly with texts I didn't bother reading. 3 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. She was activating every piece of her network, spreading word about my impending academic disaster, but she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd been planning for this moment since the day I discovered her true nature. The exam room buzzed with a nervous energy. 200 students hunched over their desks, pencils scratching against answer sheets. The questions were indeed brutal. Complex pathways, intricate cellular processes, the kind of material that required months of dedicated study. Good thing I'd actually been studying for months. While Mom thought she was stealing my only copies, I'd been maintaining duplicates in my storage unit. While she deleted files from my laptop, I'd been uploading backups to secure cloud servers. Every note, every diagram, every practice exam safely beyond her reach. Question after question fell to my pen. Glycolysis pathways flowed like water. Protein synthesis unfolded like a story I'd been telling myself for years. This was what I'd been born to do, and no amount of sabotage could change my fundamental understanding of these processes. 2 hours later, I set down my pencil with quiet confidence. Professor Martinez collected my exam personally. How do you think you did? Better than expected. Excellent. Your midterm scores have been exceptional this semester. Keep up the good work. Walking back to my car, I finally checked my phone. 17 missed calls, all from the same unknown number. Probably Mom, using different phones to try reaching me. The voicemails told a predictable story. Concerned mother worried about daughter's health. History of medical episodes during stressful situations. Please call immediately if there are any problems. She'd been laying groundwork for my failure before I'd even entered the exam room. Time to spring my trap. I drove to the campus library and settled into a quiet corner with my laptop. Within minutes, I'd accessed the hidden camera feeds from our house. Mom was pacing the living room, phone glued to her ear, gesturing wildly as she spoke. The audio was crystal clear. She looked terrible this morning, pale, shaky, completely unprepared. I'm expecting a call from the school any minute now. A pause while the other person responded. Of course it's tragic, but I've been warning everyone for years about her condition. Some people just aren't cut out for the demands of higher education. Another pause. Medical school was always an unrealistic goal. I've been gently trying to guide her toward more suitable career options, but she's so stubborn. I saved the recording and began transcribing the most damaging quotes. Her words painted a perfect picture of a manipulative parent, undermining her child's academic success while maintaining plausible deniability. My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Is this Sarah Mitchell? The voice was professional, female, unfamiliar. Yes. This is Dr. Patricia Chen from the Office of Student Affairs. Your mother contacted us with some concerns about your well-being. The name hit me like lightning. Patricia Chen, the nursing student Mom had poisoned in 1994. The woman whose quick thinking had exposed Rebecca Whitmore's pattern of abuse. She was here, at my medical school, and Mom had just contacted her directly. What kind of concerns? I asked carefully. She mentioned you have a history of health episodes during stressful situations. She seemed to think you might need accommodations for today's exam. I took the exam this morning. I felt fine. A pause. You took the biochemistry final? Your mother seemed certain you'd be too ill to attend. Did she specify what kind of illness? She mentioned chronic health issues, possibly stress-related. She said you've been struggling with these problems for years. Perfect. Mom had just connected herself to a decades-old pattern of sabotage, speaking directly to her former victim about her current victim's mysterious health problems. Dr. Chen, could we meet in person? I think there are some things you should know about my mother's concerns. Another pause, longer this time. Can you be in my office in 20 minutes? I'll be right there. The walk across campus felt like floating. Everything was falling into place with clockwork precision. Mom's desperation had led her to contact the one person who could definitively prove her pattern of abuse. Dr. Chen's office was small but welcoming, filled with plants and family photos. She looked exactly like I'd imagined from her college newspaper pictures. Intelligent eyes, kind smile, the bearing of someone who'd survived something terrible and chosen to help others. Please, sit down. She gestured to a comfortable chair across from her desk. Your mother called about an hour ago. She seemed very worried. She was worried, all right. Worried that I might actually succeed. Dr. Chen's expression shifted slightly. What do you mean? I opened my laptop and showed her the morning's recording. Mom's voice filled the office, clear and damning. Medical school was always an unrealistic goal. I've been gently trying to guide her toward more suitable career options. This was recorded today? About an hour ago, she thought I'd failed my biochemistry exam. She was already preparing to explain my academic collapse to anyone who would listen. Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair, her face pale. Sarah, I need to ask you some very direct questions. Has your mother ever given you food or drinks before important academic events? For 24 years, have you experienced unexplained illness symptoms during high-stress situations? Until I learned to protect myself, yes. Have you ever been tested for poisoning? I showed her the hospital records from my college graduation. The same confused medical reports she'd probably seen after her own poisoning 30 years ago. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents with the careful attention of someone who recognized a familiar pattern. Your mother's name, she said finally, before she married. What was it? Rebecca Ann Whitmore. The color drained from her face completely. She turned to her computer and began typing rapidly, pulling up records I couldn't see from my angle. She was expelled from St. Catherine's nursing program in 1994. For poisoning you. Dr. Chen's hands trembled slightly as she printed several documents. I was never certain. The evidence was circumstantial. But 3 of us became ill after accepting food from her, always right before major exams. What happened to the other students? One dropped out of nursing entirely. The other switched to a different school. Both said they couldn't trust their own judgment anymore about what was safe to eat or drink. She'd destroyed 3 futures in nursing school alone. How many others had there been over the years? Dr. Chen, I have extensive evidence of her systematic sabotage. Audio recordings, video footage, documented patterns going back decades. But I need your help. What kind of help? I need someone with authority to believe me. Someone who understands her methods. Someone who can help me protect other potential victims. Dr. Chen reached for her phone. I'm calling campus security and the local police. This pattern of behavior needs to be investigated thoroughly. Wait, I held up a hand. There's something else you should know. She didn't just call you today. She's been contacting my professors all semester, building a narrative about my supposed mental instability and academic inadequacy. Do you have proof of this? I showed her screenshots of emails, recordings of phone conversations, documented evidence of systematic interference with my education. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of long-term psychological abuse disguised as maternal concern. This is extensive, Dr. Chen murmured, scrolling through the files. How long have you been collecting this information? Since I figured out what she was doing, I wanted to build an airtight case before I acted. And now you're ready to act? She made a mistake contacting you. She connected her current behavior to her past pattern of abuse. That's the link I needed to prove this isn't just a family dispute. It's a criminal pattern spanning 3 decades. Dr. Chen stood up and walked to her window, looking out at students crossing the campus quad. Young people pursuing their dreams, trusting that the adults in their lives wanted them to succeed. Your biochemistry exam, she said suddenly. How do you think you actually performed? I aced it. Every question, every essay. Despite her trying to sabotage my preparation. And your overall performance in medical school? Top 5% of my class. I was accepted to Harvard for next semester. She turned back to me with something like wonder in her eyes. You survived her, not just survived. You thrived. Because I finally understood what I was fighting against. Most victims never recover from this kind of systematic abuse. The psychological damage is usually too severe. Maybe I'm not most victims. Dr. Chen picked up her phone again. I'm calling Detective Morrison from the Family Crimes Unit. She specializes in cases of domestic abuse and poisoning. And then I'm calling the dean. This investigation is going to be thorough, official, and documented. As she made the calls, I sat quietly in her office feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: safety, protection. The knowledge that finally someone with power and authority was taking my side against the monster who'd raised me. My phone buzzed with another call from Mom. I'd let it go to voicemail. 20 minutes later, Detective Morrison arrived. She was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes and the no-nonsense bearing of someone who'd seen too many family secrets. Dr. Chen filled me in on the basics, she said, settling into a chair. But I need to hear the full story from you. I walked her through everything: the decades of mysterious illnesses, the hospital discovery after graduation, the months of evidence collection, the escalating sabotage since I'd started medical school, the morning's theft of my study materials, and Mom's premature victory celebration. Detective Morrison took notes throughout my recital, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she looked up from her notepad with grim satisfaction. This is the most well-documented case of systematic family abuse I've ever seen. You've essentially built our entire case for us. What happens next? We obtain search warrants for your family home. We interview your father about his knowledge of the situation. We contact other potential victims from your mother's past. And we build a criminal case that will ensure she never has the opportunity to do this to anyone else. The weight of those words settled over me like a blanket. After 24 years of being her victim, I was finally going to be her downfall. There's one more thing, I said. She's probably expecting me to come home tonight looking defeated and broken. What if I don't? Detective Morrison smiled for the first time since arriving. What if you show up looking exactly like what you are? A successful medical student who just aced her biochemistry final. She'll panic. Panic makes people stupid. Stupid people make mistakes, and we'll be there to document every single one. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang again. Mom's number this time, not a burner phone. Answer it, Detective Morrison instructed. Put it on speaker. Hi, Mom. Sarah, thank God. How did the exam go? Are you okay? Do you need me to pick you up? Her voice carried that familiar note of false concern mixed with predatory anticipation. The exam went great, actually. I think I aced it. Silence on the other end. Then, that's wonderful, dear, but are you sure? Sometimes when we're stressed, we think we've done better than we actually have. I'm sure. Professor Martinez even complimented me on the way out. But you were so unprepared this morning. You couldn't find any of your study materials. Turns out I didn't need them. Amazing what the human brain can retain when it's not being systematically poisoned. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear her mind racing, trying to calculate how much I knew, how much I could prove. I don't know what you mean by that, she said finally. Don't you? I think you know exactly what I mean. Just like Patricia Chen knew back in 1994. The line went dead. Detective Morrison was already on her radio calling for units to proceed to my family's address. She's going to run or destroy evidence. We need to move fast. But I wasn't worried about Mom running. She was too invested in her role as the suffering mother of a difficult daughter, too committed to the narrative she'd spent decades building. She would stay and fight, convinced she could manipulate her way out of trouble one more time. She had no idea that this time, her victim had become her hunter, and the trap she'd walked into had been 24 years in the making. The police arrived at our house before I did. 3 patrol cars lined our quiet suburban street like predators circling wounded prey. Neighbors gathered on their front lawns, whispering behind cupped hands as officers in latex gloves carried evidence boxes from our front door. Mom stood on the porch in handcuffs, her face a mask of outraged innocence, as Detective Morrison read her rights. She caught sight of me stepping out of my car, and her expression shifted to something desperate and pleading. Sarah, thank God you're here. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them about your medical condition, about how confused you get during stressful episodes. Her voice carried that familiar tone of maternal concern, but the handcuffs destroyed any pretense of authority. She looked exactly like what she was, a criminal caught in the act of destroying evidence. I walked past her without a word, following Detective Morrison into our kitchen, where Dad sat at the table, looking like he'd aged 20 years in the past hour. His hands shook as he signed document after document, his neat signature authorizing searches of every room, every computer, every possible hiding place Mom might have used for her arsenal of sabotage tools. She kept everything in the basement, he said quietly, not looking up from the papers. Behind the water heater, in old paint cans. Bottles of Ipecac, sleep aids, laxatives. Enough chemicals to stock a pharmacy. His voice broke slightly. I found them 6 months ago during spring cleaning, but I told myself there had to be an innocent explanation. I told myself she wouldn't actually. Detective Morrison set a plastic evidence bag on the table between us. Inside was a small amber bottle with a handwritten label, for S's special occasions. The liquid inside was clear and odorless, exactly like water. Your mother tried to flush this down the toilet when we knocked on the door, Detective Morrison explained. Lucky for us, your plumbing isn't very efficient. She opened her notebook and consulted her notes. We also found detailed journals documenting dosages, timing, and your reactions going back 15 years. Very thorough record keeping. Dad stared at the evidence bag like it might bite him. She documented it. Dates, times, amounts administered, expected duration of symptoms. She treated your daughter's poisoning like a scientific experiment. Detective Morrison's voice carried barely controlled anger. Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask again. How much did you know about your wife's systematic abuse of your daughter? I suspected something was wrong, but I never imagined. I thought maybe she was just overprotective. Maybe giving Sarah mild sedatives to keep her calm during stressful times. Dad's face crumpled with shame. I told myself it was better to stay out of it than to make accusations I couldn't prove. Even when Sarah collapsed at her college graduation, Rebecca said the doctors found evidence of food poisoning. She said it proved Sarah was too delicate for high-stress situations. He looked up at me for the first time since I'd entered the room. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so goddamn sorry. I should have protected you. The apology felt hollow, too little and 24 years too late. But for the first time in my life, I was hearing him acknowledge the truth without Mom's manipulation coloring his words. Where is she now? I asked Detective Morrison. Booking. We're charging her with assault, child endangerment, fraud, and interference with your education. The DA is also looking at charges related to the nursing school incidents from 1994. She closed her notebook with satisfaction. Dr. Chen's testimony, combined with your evidence and the physical materials we found today, makes this one of the strongest domestic abuse cases I've worked. Through the kitchen window, I watched the last police car pull away from our street. The neighbors were still lingering in their yards, hungry for details about the drama that had erupted in their quiet subdivision. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Rebecca Mitchell, the woman who'd organized bake sales and volunteered at school functions for decades, was actually a systematic poisoner who'd spent 24 years destroying her own daughter's future. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, my study group partner. How did the biochem final go? Want to celebrate tonight? It went perfectly, I texted back. And yes, let's celebrate. I have big news to share. Dad was still sitting at the kitchen table when I finished texting, staring at his hands like they might hold answers to questions he'd never thought to ask. What happens now? He said quietly. Now you decide who you want to be, I replied. The man who enabled an abuser for 24 years, or the man who finally chooses to do the right thing. He looked up at me with eyes that held more pain than I'd ever seen before. I've already filed for divorce. I contacted a lawyer this morning before the police arrived. I can't live with someone who could do this to their own child. Good. I want to testify at her trial. I want to tell them everything I witnessed, everything I should have reported years ago. His voice grew stronger with each word. And I want to help pay for your Harvard tuition. I know it doesn't make up for what I failed to do, but it's a start. The offer surprised me. Not because of the money, I'd already secured full financial aid, but because it represented the first proactive step he'd taken in my direction in decades. I don't need your money, Dad. I need you to make sure other people's daughters are protected from predators like her. What do you mean? I mean your testimony might be the difference between a suspended sentence and real prison time. I mean your willingness to admit what you knew and when you knew It could save other families from going through what we've been through. He nodded slowly, understanding finally settling over his features. She's not the woman I married, or maybe she is, and I was just too weak to see it. It doesn't matter what she was. What matters is what you choose to do now. That evening, I met my study group at our usual pizza place near campus. The familiar chaos of college students celebrating the end of finals week felt surreal after the day's events. Lisa and Marcus were already deep in conversation about their plans for winter break when I arrived. "Sarah, perfect timing," Jennifer called from our corner booth. We were just discussing how brutally difficult that biochem final was. I think half the class is going to fail. "It wasn't that bad," I said, sliding into the booth beside her. The questions were challenging, but fair. "Are you kidding? The section on metabolic pathways was impossible. I ran out of time on the last 3 essays." Lisa shook her head in frustration. "I'll be lucky to pass." Marcus looked equally discouraged. "My parents are going to kill me if I fail biochemistry. They've sacrificed everything for my education." The irony wasn't lost on me. While my classmates worried about disappointing parents who wanted them to succeed, I'd spent the day watching my own mother get arrested for systematically preventing my success. "Your parents want what's best for you," I said carefully. "That makes you luckier than you know." "Speaking of parents," Jennifer said, "didn't your mom call the school earlier? Something about you being sick?" I'd been waiting for this question all evening. My friends deserved to know the truth, especially since the story would inevitably become public once the trial began. "My mother was arrested today," I said quietly, "for systematically poisoning me over the past 24 years. The table fell silent. Pizza slices were set down mid-bite. 3 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions of shock and disbelief. "What?" Lisa whispered. "She's been putting various toxins in my food and drinks since I was born, timing the doses to coincide with important academic events. Tests, interviews, scholarship applications, anything that might lead to my success." The words felt strange in my mouth, clinical and detached. The police found journals documenting her methods going back 15 years. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed. "Sarah, that's monstrous." "It explains a lot, actually. Why I always seemed to get sick at crucial moments. Why my academic performance was so inconsistent despite my obvious ability." I took a sip of my Coke, tasting nothing but sweetness and carbonation. Today was the first time I took a major exam without being systematically poisoned. It felt like seeing color after years of being colorblind. Jennifer reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Is that why you've been so different this semester? More confident, more focused?" "I learned to protect myself. Started bringing my own food, avoided anything she prepared, took antidotes when necessary." I smiled at their horrified expressions. "I've been building a case against her for months. Today she finally made a mistake that allowed the police to act." "What kind of mistake?" Lisa asked. "She contacted Dr. Patricia Chen to report my supposed academic problems. What she didn't know is that Dr. Chen was one of her victims 30 years ago when Mom was kicked out of nursing school for poisoning fellow students." The pieces clicked together in their minds, and I watched their faces shift from sympathy to something approaching awe. "You planned this," Marcus said slowly. "You've been playing chess while she was playing checkers." "I've been surviving while she was trying to destroy me. There's a difference." We spent the next 2 hours talking through the implications of what I'd revealed. My friends asked careful questions about how I'd endured the abuse, how I'd figured out what was happening, how I'd found the strength to fight back. Their support felt like sunlight after years of living in shadow. "What happens now?" Jennifer asked as we prepared to leave. "Now I transfer to Harvard for spring semester. I become the doctor I was always meant to be. And I make sure she never has the opportunity to hurt anyone else." I stood up from the booth, feeling lighter than I had in decades. For the first time in my life, my future belongs entirely to me. 2 weeks later, I sat in a courthouse waiting room, reviewing my testimony notes for what the prosecutor promised would be the final day of Mom's preliminary hearing. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses credible, the outcome inevitable. But she'd insisted on pleading not guilty, forcing a full trial where every detail of her systematic abuse would become part of the public record. Dad sat beside me, looking smaller than I remembered from childhood. He'd aged years in the past month, the weight of his complicity carving new lines into his face. But he'd been true to his word. His testimony had been devastating to Mom's defense, confirming every pattern of suspicious behavior I'd documented. The prosecutor says she'll probably get 15 to 20 years, he said quietly. With the extent of the abuse and the length of time involved, the judge won't be lenient. Good. I know you hate me for not stopping her sooner. You have every right to. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd been my father in name but never in protection. I don't hate you, Dad. I pity you. You had 24 years to choose between your wife and your daughter, and you chose wrong every single time. I know. But you're choosing correctly now. That has to count for something. He nodded, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. Will you ever be able to forgive me? I don't know. Ask me in 10 years when I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and she's still in prison for what she did to me. Dr. Patricia Chen emerged from the courtroom, her expression grim but satisfied. She'd just finished giving testimony about her own poisoning 30 years ago, establishing the pattern that would ensure Mom's conviction. How did it go in there? Dad asked. The defense attorney tried to argue that the incidents were unrelated, that any similarities were coincidental. Dr. Chen shook her head. The jury didn't buy it. When you have the same person using the same methods on multiple victims across 3 decades, coincidence becomes impossible to believe. Through the courtroom doors, I could see Mom sitting at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit. She looked older, diminished, stripped of the authority she'd wielded over my life for so long. The handcuffs she'd worn during her arrest had been replaced by shackles around her ankles. She turned and caught sight of me through the glass, her eyes pleading for some sign of the dutiful daughter she'd spent decades creating. Instead, she found a young woman who looked exactly like what she was, strong, healthy, unbroken despite her best efforts. I smiled at her, not with malice or revenge, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd finally escaped a trap that had defined her entire existence. She turned away quickly, unable to hold my gaze. All rise, came the bailiff's voice from inside the courtroom. The Honorable Judge Williams presiding. This was it, the moment when Rebecca Ann Mitchell would learn the consequences of 24 years of systematic child abuse disguised as maternal love. I walked into that courtroom with my head held high, ready to watch justice finally catch up with the monster who'd raised me. The spider who'd spent decades weaving webs of poison and control was about to discover what it felt like to be trapped in someone else's design, and for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the threads. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes. When they filed back into the courtroom, their faces carried the grim satisfaction of people who'd seen evil clearly and chosen justice accordingly. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and steel in her voice, read the verdict with unwavering clarity. Guilty on all charges. Mom's legs buckled. She gripped the defendant's table as sobs racked her body, the careful mask of innocence finally cracking completely. Her attorney put a steadying hand on her shoulder, but there was nothing left to steady. 24 years of systematic abuse had been laid bare, documented, and judged by 12 of her peers. The woman who'd controlled every aspect of my life through poison and manipulation now faced 15 to 20 years behind bars, powerless to hurt anyone ever again. Judge Williams scheduled sentencing for the following week, but the outcome was certain. Mom would spend the rest of her productive years in prison, paying for crimes that had stolen decades from her own daughter. As the bailiff led her away in shackles, she turned back one final time, her eyes searching mine for some trace of the frightened, dependent child she'd created through years of calculated abuse. Instead, she found a young woman who looked exactly like what I'd always been underneath her poisonous influence. Brilliant, strong, and utterly beyond her reach. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at Dad's apartment with my name written in Mom's familiar handwriting. Prison letterhead stamped the return address, official and damning. Dad handed it to me with trembling fingers, his face gray with exhaustion from weeks of testimony and revelations. She's been writing to you every day since the verdict, he said quietly. The warden called. Apparently, she's been increasingly agitated. demanding they deliver her messages immediately. They're concerned about her mental state. I turned the envelope over in my hands, feeling its weight. Thick paper, multiple pages. She'd always been verbose when she wanted something, using words like weapons to manipulate and control. "Aren't you going to open it?" Dad asked. "Not yet. First, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been keeping secret until the trial was over." Dad sank into his recliner, the same chair where he'd sat passively for years while Mom poisoned me systematically. "What now?" I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder I'd been protecting for months. Screenshots, emails, official documents that represented the biggest twist in a story he thought he knew completely. "I didn't just get accepted to Harvard Medical School, Dad. I've been attending Harvard Medical School for the past 6 months." The words hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, processing information that shattered everything he thought he understood about the past year. "That's impossible. You've been going to State University. I've seen you leave for classes, seen your textbooks. I've been commuting to Harvard 3 days a week and taking classes online the other days. What you saw was elaborate theater designed to make Mom believe she still had control over my education." I turned my laptop screen toward him, showing my official Harvard transcript. Straight A's across every course, glowing professor recommendations, research positions that most students didn't qualify for until their second year. But how? The applications, the interviews, the recommendations. I applied secretly 2 years ago, using teachers and professors she'd never met. I interviewed during times when she thought I was too sick to leave my room. I've been building an entirely separate academic life that existed completely outside her sphere of influence. Dad stared at the screen like it might disappear if he blinked. 2 years? You've been planning this for 2 years? Longer. I started researching antidotes to her poisons when I was 16. I began documenting her patterns when I was 18. The Harvard application was just the culmination of years of preparation. I scrolled through more documents. Scholarship awards, research grants, offers from medical journals to publish papers I'd written in secret. Everything she tried to destroy, I rebuilt in hidden places she couldn't reach. The storage unit, the secret bank accounts, the phone she didn't know about. Understanding dawned in his eyes like sunrise over ruins. You weren't just collecting evidence against her. You were building an entire life without her. While she thought she was keeping me weak and dependent, I was becoming the person I was always meant to be, the person her poisons were designed to prevent me from becoming. I opened another folder revealing financial documents that made Dad's face go pale. Bank statements showing steady income from research work and tutoring, investment accounts I'd been funding for 3 years, a credit score that most people twice my age would envy. My God, Sarah, you're completely independent. Financially, academically, professionally, you don't need either of us for anything. I haven't needed you for anything in a very long time. The only thing I needed was for her to be stopped before she could hurt someone else. Dad was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what I'd revealed. His daughter, the chronically ill, academically struggling daughter he'd pitied for years, was actually a Harvard Medical School student with a secret career and financial independence most adults could only dream of. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because until 3 weeks ago, I couldn't trust you to choose my safety over her comfort. You'd proven that repeatedly for 24 years. The truth of that statement settled between us like smoke from a funeral pyre. He couldn't argue with it because the evidence was written in decades of his own passive complicity. "What now?" he asked finally. "Now I read what she wrote, and then I decide whether she deserves a response." I opened Mom's letter with steady hands, prepared for whatever manipulation she'd crafted during her first days in prison. The handwriting was shakier than usual, desperation bleeding through her usually careful penmanship. "My dearest Sarah, I know you're angry with me, and I understand why. What happened in court was a terrible misunderstanding, fueled by people who don't know our family or understand the special bond between a mother and daughter. Already the gaslighting had begun. What happened in court wasn't a misunderstanding. It was justice delivered after decades of systematic abuse. I've been thinking constantly about our situation, and I realize I may have been overprotective at times, Mothers sometimes make mistakes when they love their children too much. I was so terrified of watching you fail and get hurt that I may have gone too far in trying to shield you from disappointment. Overprotective, the word she'd chosen to describe 24 years of deliberate poisoning. As if systematic child abuse could be reframed as maternal concern taken to an unfortunate extreme. The doctors here say I'm having a breakdown from the stress of being separated from you. My blood pressure is dangerously high, and I've been having chest pains that might be my heart. I'm scared, Sarah. I'm scared I might die in here without ever having the chance to make things right between us. The medical manipulation felt familiar, just like the mysterious episodes she'd claimed whenever I'd tried to assert independence in the past. Convenient health crises designed to refocus my attention on her supposed vulnerability. I need you to visit me. I need you to testify at my sentencing hearing about what a loving mother I've always been despite my mistakes. Tell them about all the times I stayed up with you when you were sick, all the sacrifices I made for your education, all the ways I've devoted my life to your happiness. The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted me to testify on behalf of the woman who'd been making me sick, who'd been destroying my education, who'd sacrificed my happiness to feed her own psychological needs for control and dependency. If you don't help me, I don't know what I'll do. The other inmates here are dangerous, and I'm not strong enough to protect myself. Without hope of reconciliation with my daughter, I might not be able to find the will to survive this ordeal. And there it was. The implicit threat of suicide that she'd wielded like a blade throughout my childhood. Whenever I'd shown signs of independent thinking, the ultimate manipulation, designed to make me responsible for her well-being while she actively destroyed mine. I'm begging you, Sarah. Don't let our relationship end this way. Come see me, and let me explain everything. Let me show you how much I love you, how sorry I am for any pain I may have caused. We can fix this, but only if you choose forgiveness over anger. All my love, Mom. P.S. I've been praying that your health problems haven't returned now that you're under so much stress. Please take care of yourself. You're all I have left in this world. I read the letter twice, noting every manipulation technique she deployed. The minimization of her crimes as overprotectiveness and mistakes. The false medical emergency designed to create urgency and guilt. The threat of self-harm if I didn't comply with her demands. The reframing of our relationship as something damaged by my anger rather than her abuse. Most telling was the postscript, her continued pretense that my health problems had been real rather than manufactured by her systematic poisoning. Even now, facing years in prison for her crimes, she couldn't acknowledge the full truth of what she'd done. Dad had been watching my face as I read, noting the progression from curiosity to disgust to something approaching pity. What does she want? She wants me to visit her in prison. She wants me to testify at her sentencing hearing about what a wonderful mother she's been. She wants me to take responsibility for saving her from the consequences of 24 years of child abuse. Are you going to do it? The question hung in the air between us like incense from a dying fire. For most of my life, the answer would have been automatic. Of course I would visit her. Of course I would testify on her behalf. Of course I would sacrifice my own well-being to protect hers, just like I'd been trained to do since birth. But the woman sitting in this apartment wasn't the broken, dependent daughter she'd spent decades creating. The woman sitting here was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Harvard Medical School student, independent researcher, survivor of systematic abuse who'd rebuilt herself from the ruins of her mother's manipulations. No, I said quietly. The word felt like a key turning in a lock that had held me captive for 24 years. No, I will not visit her. No, I will not testify on her behalf. No, I will not take responsibility for fixing a relationship she destroyed through decades of deliberate abuse. Dad looked stunned, as if he'd never heard me refuse a direct request before. And perhaps he hadn't. Mom had been so thorough in her conditioning that outright defiance had been almost impossible until I'd learned to protect myself from her chemical manipulations. But she's your mother. She's my abuser. Those aren't the same thing. She says she's sick. What if she really is having heart problems? Then she'll receive appropriate medical care from the prison healthcare system. Her health is no longer my responsibility. What if she what if she hurts herself? The question I'd been dreading for years finally spoken aloud, the ultimate manipulation that had kept me trapped long after I'd understood what she was doing to me. Then that will be her choice, not my fault. I am not responsible for preventing an adult woman from making decisions about her own life, especially when that woman spent 24 years systematically destroying mine. The words felt strange in my mouth. Foreign concepts that went against every lesson she'd taught me about duty, loyalty, and the sacred bond between mother and child. But they also felt true in a way that nothing else ever had. Sarah, I understand you're angry. I'm not angry, Dad. Anger is what you feel towards someone who's wronged you temporarily. What I feel toward her is something much colder and more permanent. What do you feel? I considered the question carefully, searching for words that could accurately describe the emotional landscape I'd been navigating since the day I'd discovered her true nature. Nothing. I feel absolutely nothing toward Rebecca Mitchell. She's become irrelevant to my life, like a disease I've finally recovered from completely. The clinical detachment in my voice seemed to disturb Dad more than anger would have. He was accustomed to emotion, to dramatic confrontations and tearful reconciliations. What he'd never seen before was the kind of cold, clear judgment that came from complete emotional independence. She gave you life. She spent 24 years systematically destroying that life. We're even. But family protects each other. Family celebrates each other's successes. Family doesn't deliberately poison their children to prevent them from achieving their dreams. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at a world that no longer held any trace of her influence. She was never my family, Dad. She was my warden. My phone rang. Dr. Chen's number on the caller ID. Sarah, I just wanted to let you know that the sentencing hearing has been scheduled for next Friday at 10 a.m. Will you be making a victim impact statement? I looked back at Dad, who was watching me with desperate hope in his eyes. He wanted me to choose reconciliation, forgiveness, the kind of healing that would allow him to believe our family might somehow recover from the damage she'd inflicted. Yes, I told Dr. Chen. I'll be making a statement. Dad's face lit up with relief, misunderstanding my intention completely. But not the kind she's hoping for. 20 minutes later, I was back in my car driving toward Harvard, leaving Dad to process the rubble of everything he'd thought he knew about his wife, his daughter, and the family that had never actually existed in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Study group tonight for tomorrow's pathology exam? Jennifer found an amazing set of case studies. I texted back quickly. Absolutely, I'll bring coffee and the good notebooks. Real friends. Authentic relationships. A future built on my own merits and choices rather than someone else's manipulations and control. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by people who wanted me to succeed rather than fail. The woman in prison could write all the letters she wanted. She could claim illness, threaten self-harm, beg for forgiveness until her voice gave out from the effort. None of it mattered anymore. The spider who'd spent decades weaving webs of poison and control around my life had finally been caught in a trap of her own making. And I was the one who'd built the trap, baited it perfectly, and watched her walk into it with the confidence of someone who'd never imagined their victim might become their hunter. Next Friday, I would stand before a judge and deliver my victim impact statement. But I wouldn't be speaking as her daughter. I would be speaking as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the woman she'd tried to prevent me from becoming, testifying about crimes she'd committed against the child I used to be. The child who'd died the day I'd learned to protect myself from her poison. The woman who'd risen from those ashes belonged entirely to herself, and no amount of manipulation, threats, or guilt would ever change that again. 6 months later, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my research lab on the 23rd floor of Harvard Medical School, watching the sun set over Boston Harbor. The city sprawled beneath me in golden light, a living testament to dreams that survived against impossible odds. My reflection in the glass showed a woman I'd never expected to become. Confident, healthy, completely free from the poison that had defined my first 24 years. The sentencing hearing had been swift and decisive. I'd delivered my victim impact statement in a voice steady as granite, speaking not as her daughter, but as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, detailing 24 years of systematic abuse with the clinical precision of someone presenting medical evidence. The judge had listened with increasing horror, occasionally glancing at Mom in her orange jumpsuit as if trying to reconcile the broken woman before him with the calculated predator I described. Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Williams had said when I finished, your crimes represent one of the most disturbing cases of long-term domestic abuse this court has ever seen. You systematically poisoned your own child for nearly a quarter century, destroying opportunities, sabotaging dreams, and causing immeasurable psychological trauma. His voice had carried the weight of absolute moral authority. I sentence you to 22 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Mom had collapsed completely at those words, her sobs echoing through the courtroom like the death rattle of the control she'd wielded over my life for so long. I'd watched her break down with the same detached interest I'd show to any fascinating pathology case, observing symptoms, noting patterns, drawing clinical conclusions about the specimen before me. I'd felt nothing, no satisfaction, no revenge, no closure, just the quiet relief of someone watching a tumor finally excised from their body. Now, months later, I was exactly where I'd always belonged. My research into detecting chronic poisoning and family abuse cases had gained national attention, earning me invitations to speak at conferences across the country. The paper I'd published, Systematic Chemical Abuse, Recognition Patterns in Domestic Settings, had become required reading in social work programs and medical schools nationwide. Dr. Mitchell. My research assistant, a brilliant second-year student named David, knocked on my office door. The victim's advocate from Chicago is on line 3. She says it's about the Henderson case. The Henderson case. A 17-year-old girl whose mysterious illnesses had coincided with her mother's opposition to her college applications. The pattern was heartbreakingly familiar. Strategic poisoning designed to keep a bright, capable young woman dependent and controlled. My research had helped investigators recognize the signs early enough to save her future. Put her through to my office, I said, settling behind my desk with the satisfaction of someone whose work had found its true purpose. Dr. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Santos from Chicago Children's Services. The Henderson girl is going to be okay. Your consultation helped us identify the specific toxins, and we were able to get her medical treatment and remove her from the home before permanent damage occurred. That's wonderful news. What about the mother? Arrested this morning, the evidence you helped us gather was overwhelming. She'd been documenting her methods just like your mother did. Apparently, this kind of systematic poisoning is more common than anyone realized. More common than anyone realized. The words sent a chill through me, but also a sense of purpose that warmed me from within. How many other daughters were enduring what I'd survived? How many brilliant young women were being systematically destroyed by the very people who should have been nurturing their potential? I'm glad we could help, I said. Please keep me updated on similar cases. This is exactly the kind of research that can save lives. After hanging up, I returned to the window, watching sailboats drift across the harbor like white birds against the darkening water. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Dinner tonight. Lisa and Marcus want to hear about your conference presentation in Seattle. These friendships had become the bedrock of my new life. People who celebrated my successes, supported my goals, and never once suggested that my achievements were too ambitious for someone of my delicate constitution. Real relationships built on mutual respect rather than toxic dependency. Dad and I spoke occasionally, brief conversations where he updated me on his therapy progress and his efforts to rebuild a life free from Mom's influence. He'd testified in 3 additional cases where my research had identified similar patterns of family poisoning. His willingness to admit his complicity helping prosecutors secure convictions. It wasn't forgiveness, that might never come, but it was progress towards something resembling peace. I understand why you can't trust me yet, he'd said during our last phone call. But I want you to know that watching you succeed despite everything she did, it's the only thing that lets me sleep at night. Sleep came easily to me now, no mysterious crashes at 2 a.m., no phantom sounds designed to disrupt my rest, no chemical fog clouding my thoughts or slowing my reactions. For the first time in my life, my mind belonged entirely to me, sharp and clear and uncompromised by anyone else's poison. My apartment near Harvard Square had become a sanctuary of my own design. Books I'd chosen, food I'd prepared, furniture that reflected my taste rather than anyone else's need for control. The walls were lined with medical texts, research awards, photographs from conferences where I'd presented my findings to audiences who respected my expertise. On my desk sat a letter that had arrived that morning, forwarded from the medical school's main office. The return address showed a women's shelter in Portland, Oregon, the careful handwriting of someone who'd learned to write in secret. Dear Dr. Mitchell, my name is Amanda, and I'm 18 years old. I read about your research in a magazine article about domestic abuse, and I think my stepfather might have been doing to me what your mother did to you. I've been getting sick before every college interview, every scholarship application, every opportunity that might let me leave home. I saved samples of the drinks he gives me when I'm feeling stressed, the ones that make me too sick to attend important events. I found your paper online about testing for these kinds of poisons, and I had them analyzed at a local lab. You were right. The drinks contained chemicals that shouldn't exist in normal food. I'm finally free from his house, staying at a safe shelter, and applying to colleges under my real name, instead of the fake one he made me use. I wanted to thank you for your research, for speaking up about what happened to you, for making it possible for other people like me to understand that we're not crazy, we're not weak, and we're not imagining things. Your work saved my life. I start community college next month, and someday I want to be a doctor too. Maybe I can help save someone else the way you helped save me. With gratitude, Amanda, I read the letter 3 times, feeling something warm and healing spread through my chest. This was why I'd survived. This was why I'd endured 24 years of systematic abuse and emerged strong enough to build a case that sent my abuser to prison. Not for revenge, not for personal satisfaction, but so that other daughters could escape the traps their parents had set for them. The sun had fully set now, leaving Boston Harbor painted in shades of purple and gold. City lights twinkled like stars below, each one representing someone's dreams, someone's ambitions, someone's hopes for a future they controlled completely. My phone rang, an unknown number with a Massachusetts area code. Dr. Mitchell, this is Dr. Catherine Walsh from Boston General Hospital. We have a young woman in our emergency department, and her symptoms match the patterns described in your research paper. Would it be possible for you to consult on her case? Another victim, another daughter who'd been systematically poisoned by someone who claimed to love her. Another life that could be saved if we acted quickly enough. I'll be right there, I said, already reaching for my medical bag. This was my calling now. Not just healing bodies, but exposing the hidden poisons that destroyed young women's futures before they could even begin. Every case I consulted on, every paper I published, every conference presentation I delivered was another tool in the hands of people who could recognize the signs and save the next victim. Driving through Boston's night-lit streets toward the hospital, I thought about the woman I'd become and the child I'd once been. That frightened, sickly girl who'd collapsed at her college graduation would hardly recognize the confident doctor speeding through traffic to save another young woman from the same systematic destruction. The poison was gone from my body completely now, metabolized and eliminated like any other toxin. But the strength I'd developed in fighting it, the knowledge I'd gained in surviving it, the purpose I'd found in using it to help others, those would last forever. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Clear eyes, healthy complexion, the face of someone who'd been reborn into a life entirely of her own choosing. Someone who'd turned 24 years of victimization into a career of helping other victims. Someone who'd transformed poison into medicine. The light turned green, and I drove toward whatever case was waiting for me, ready to use everything I'd learned about surviving abuse to ensure another daughter could escape the trap that had once held me. Behind me, Boston Harbor stretched toward the horizon, vast and limitless as the future I'd finally claimed for myself. The spider web that had once imprisoned me was gone completely, its toxic threads dissolved by time and justice, and the simple truth that some people were meant to fly no matter who tried to clip their wings. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, and for the first time in my life, that future belonged entirely to me.